what flies like an aircraft, what sounds like an aircraft, what looks like an aircraft, but isn't an aircraft simulator. And fortunately for all of us in the room who have both traveled here by airplane or have had our countries defended by air forces, the fact that people like the next company that's going to present Reflectone is that there are people in the business of trying to create aircraft simulators for the purpose of training people both in flying and maintenance. The difficulties is how do you create all of those things when you're not actually going to have the real craft itself? How do you mimic acceleration or movement at the same time while being stationary? A melding of both hardware and software for products that haven't been released or been out there for 30 years and none of the parts are available again. This is the environment that Reflectone has. A year ago they undertook a multi-project implementation. Their business is projects, and I've had the pleasure of working with them over the past year. Our two presenters is John Pitts, President and CEO of Reflectone, and John I was very impressed with because in 7 days' notice he got his entire management team together for a week in order to undertake and understand what it meant by the cultural and logistical change of doing multi-project. And Bob Mendenhall, who is the head of the implementation team. Bob was battled experience from putting in MRP in at Reflectone and felt that that was going to prepare him well in terms of undertaking a logistical and cultural change. I think you'll find their story both interesting, not from just of what they did, but the lessons learned that you can take it into your own environments. So would you help me welcome John and Bob?
Hi there. I'm John of the John and Bob Show. I'm going to do the short and easy part, and Bob's going to do all the hard part from which you're most likely to learn something. I'm going to introduce the company to you and tell you a few of the lessons that I've learned as the guy ultimately responsible for our success and the one who will suffer if we do not succeed. So let me tell you first a little bit about Reflectone. We are a slightly in excess of $100 million a year revenue company. Three pieces to our business. We have an engineering and instructional services business unit, if you will, arms and legs. We also have a training centers business where we own training devices, conduct training, and folks rotate through our training center. And then we have basically our legacy business that has to do with building simulators, full flight simulators, such as you see in this picture right here. I won't try and explain the product to you in any detail other than to say there's some tremendous complexity. It takes a whole cadre of brilliant engineers with lots of different skills and disciplines to make one of these things fly. What you're looking at in this picture is an Airbus A320 simulator. This one recently delivered. And as you look at that, underneath that big shell there is a cockpit. And it looks just like being inside the cockpit of an A320. But that pilot's got to be able to see, and so there's also a visual system that's portrayed in front of him. And the customer also likes some sense of motion when an airplane takes off, lands, hits bumps, and so on. And so you can see it's mounted on a motion system. Now the tricky part is all that has to play together, such that when you hit that bump, the right thing happens with the visual and the motion and all the oral cues and so on, which adds up to a very complex engineering challenge, if you will. And I share that because ours is, as our engineers will tell you, an engineering company. That's the good part. The bad part is it's an engineering company. That makes for a tough business challenge. We build small numbers of these devices. They cost a lot of money, anywhere from $15 to $25 million, depending on the customer, the application, the environment in which it will be used. We sell to military customers. We sell to civil customers as well. Again, I'm concentrating for the sake of this discussion, as will Bob, on our products business. It's the larger part, the larger half of this $110 million total business. with the kinds of headcount that you see on the screen. Again, low volume, high cost items. In a lot of cases, we're building prototypes again and again and again, and you don't see large production runs. And so we do a lot of learning real quick, if you will. That's the setting. Bob will get into more of the details, and he is much better skilled and prepared than I to address those. What I'd like to share with you are a few thoughts from my perspective as we have implemented, as we've begun to execute this program over the last year or so. I should add one more thing to appropriately set the stage, and that is we didn't undertake this program just out of goodness of our hearts to the Goldratt Institute wanting to pay them a lot of money. We certainly did that. We were a company in trouble. We're in the midst of a turnaround, and so we needed some help. We knew it, and that was the basis for moving forward. What have I learned in the course of this? And these are some lessons that I offer to any general manager or head of a business unit out there, but I also offer these lessons to any of you practitioners so that you might coach your general manager or your president. And I don't think you'll find this chart in your handout, so don't spend too much time looking for it. The first thing I would offer is to get the right consultant. I'll share with you that we had a false start. We spent several months talking to one potential consultant who wasn't going to work for us. Not necessarily a bad person. It's just that I was looking for somebody who could be just downright, straight, dirty, mean and nasty to me if necessary and tell me like it is. Someone who I thought our team would be willing to follow. And so we struggled for a few months not able to find that particular consultant. I'll share with you another experience, and that is from a recent dinner that Bob took me to where there was an address to a group of program managers, and there was a practitioner of the art, if you will, who shared with the audience, and I had to write this down so I could share it with you. He observed with regard to theory of constraints and how it might help all of us that it has a 100% success rate. You're going to get increased throughput with no resource increase. You're going to have reduced stress. That was the first one that caught my attention. Minimal investment and rapid results. If you should meet this particular consultant, I suggest to you do two things. Turn around and run real fast. You don't want that one. We ended up with the right one. That was Dee Jacobs. Dee was the right one because she's a straight talker. She rolls up her sleeves. She jumped in there. I recall walking down the hallway and sticking her head into one of the many rooms where we had network development activities ongoing several months ago, and she was sitting and standing in the middle of the table as she led our team through what they were about. Roll up your sleeves kind of person, and believe me, from my view, that's what you're going to need because this is hard work. Second message I would offer is you've got to have the right champion. Now, we identified a champion, the individual that was responsible for our products business when we launched this. But I shared with you this was something of a turnaround activity. That particular champion did not survive the year, and we went through some organizational changes. And so we made an appropriate transition of champions, but I probably didn't pay enough attention to that and probably didn't highlight that enough and give enough support to the follow-on champion, if you will. And that's pretty doggone important because, again, this will be a time of stress for you all. The other thing that's preached to you as you begin your theory of constraints implementation is that you've got to have commitment from upper management. And as I do the calculation in Reflectone, that probably included me. And so my commitment was very necessary, and I had to show it. And so in the course of this implementation, I've been reminded of something that I've learned many times in my career, but have to relearn it just about every day. And that means commitment often means having to say something 100 or 1,000 times. Just believing you're committed, just saying it offhanded a couple of times, just walking the halls and stroking folks ain't enough. Commitment means saying it at least 100 times, absolutely key to keep folks motivated and headed in the right direction. At the same time, I would offer that a healthy dose of common sense is absolutely essential as well. No matter what your Jonahs and your trained and prepared folks might tell you when they come back, they don't know it all. They still have a lot to learn, and I certainly haven't met the person that's figured out how to crack this implementation in a multi-project environment. There's so much complexity there that I would suggest we're all still learning how to do it. And so when senior, smart, bright, intelligent, caring folks in the organization say, wait a minute, we're forgetting something, or we're ignoring something very important in the business, or this network is wrong, or we've got to fix this before we launch, listen to them. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're necessarily trying to subvert the system. Again, this is a complex process, and you need to listen to those folks and pay attention to just plain common sense. That leads to a conundrum, the next point. You can't let the practitioners confuse common sense with a lack of commitment, and that will happen. That happened in Reflectone. Why? God knows. Because I didn't say it 100 times, because we didn't communicate clearly enough, but that application of common sense, figuring out the right way to go do things, saying why, asking some challenging questions, isn't a lack of commitment. They're not the same thing. But you're going to find some practitioners that are so indoctrinated into the TOC way, if you will, had throughput, not cost, preached at them so many times, sometimes they'll resist the common sense question or challenge. So please don't let the practitioners, or if you are one of the practitioners, don't allow yourself to confuse your enthusiasm with the common sense of the other person. Again, a complex interaction, you have to be willing to listen to everybody, and that's the next point. Not just for the CEO, but for everyone. You've got to treat your contemporaries, your counterparts in this whole process as a customer, and you've got to listen real closely, because there's a message there, and you better hear it, or you're going to screw something up in this whole process. And lastly, it is a long, hard process. It doesn't take the 3 or 4 months that we were hopeful of when we went through our brainwashing initially. It takes a lot longer than that, a lot of hard work. And as Bob will share with you, we have one major, bold step ahead of us yet. We're statusing to our critical chain on a regular basis, but we're still doing some workarounds. We haven't made that great big leap, which is ahead of us by a few weeks here now. So if you hear a great big explosion on the 2nd of August, when we do start absolutely insisting that everything is buffer management, you'll know what happened down in Tampa, Florida. That's what's ahead of us. Those are my observations, my lessons. I trust that they will help. But more important, please give your attention to Bob. He and his team have done, in my view, just an incredible job of guiding this implementation within our business. It's been extremely beneficial to us, such that I would offer, in conclusion, a few additional remarks that would basically summarize where I am on this whole project. And that is, first of all, that we met my original goals, which were quite modest, to be honest with you. I was hopeful, having done critical path activities before, of simply teaching our organization how our business fit together, how logically different tasks interconnected, and we've certainly accomplished that. That was quite simply, that was my very modest goal getting started. I've now moved well beyond that. One of the benefits of that is that we are debating issues, debating objective facts, debating processes, as opposed to indicting individuals when we sit down in a program review or a business review. That's a major step forward. That's been a hard change in the culture of our organization, but as has been preached to you, this is primarily a cultural change, and this can be a great facilitator to that end. I would suggest that TOC provides a framework for our thinking in that setting, as opposed to the answers, but that's pretty doggone important. It gets you thinking on the issues, as opposed to the other people. I guess I'm encouraged because I'm now convinced that we can take this much further than I originally hoped and anticipated. In other words, my standard is now well above the very modest goals that I had initially. But so that I don't sound like an advertisement for this whole process, I will tell you I have some continuing concerns. I've not completely bought into this mantra of throughput over cost. We're still in a world where cost is important to different folks for different reasons, and we're trying to figure out some ways on our own to address that within the context of our critical chain application. And Lastly, what I would share with you is that despite all the pain and agony that it has meant, more for Bob and his team than for me, but certainly for all of us, if asked, would we undertake this again in a turnaround situation where our business is at risk, my answer would be yes, absolutely. That's how good I feel about it. And listen closely on the 2nd of August. Thanks. Bob?
I'm Bob Mendenhall. I'm Director of Program Scheduling at Reflectone. How do you solve your resource problems? For 15 years I've been working at Reflectone. I've been in this kind of industry for 20 years, and it's been a wrestling match for the program managers and the resource managers. There doesn't seem to have been a tool for the kind of effective communication and continuous improvement type methodologies until we came upon the theory of constraints. Change can not only be just difficult, it can be very difficult. Why did we choose TOC? As John mentioned earlier, we were in rapid growth. We were struggling with our commitments. This is not a new setting in this type of market area. We were not completely satisfying customers. In fact, in one of the situations that I'll describe to you, we were about to lose a customer, a major customer. It does provide, or did provide, a more unified, structured approach for managing the programs. We came to recognize that through some efforts in establishing or looking at best practices out in the environment, and recognized that we needed something for program management, how to manage programs. And we wanted to position ourselves for long-term growth. This presentation, as a matter of fact, is structured around a description of what we did, some of the things that we did, and some of the lessons that we learned along the way in the 6 phases of an implementation. You will find out that we're somewhere between phase 5 and phase 6. There was a phase 0, which you won't see described, but phase 0 really amounts to going out and letting us look at alternatives in the different types of scheduling practices. Where are we today? Network building and critical chain scheduling. We have 13 major programs in our company, 25 networks with critical chain scheduled and on a drum schedule. That, first of all, was unprecedented for us. We had none of that kind of scheduling capability or that visibility. We also have status and reporting systems utilizing ProChain, Project 98, Access, and the Reflectone intranet. And we also make use of the email system, Outlook. We chose not to let or I did from my own experience, not to let the software product be the driver for us. We wanted to understand what the method was. And so we looked for some tools that were relatively straightforward and commercial off the shelf. As far as in-house expertise is concerned, we have 4 senior personnel that have been educated as facilitators. We have 1 person who is in training, and in the August time frame will go through the final 2 weeks of the Jonah program. These individuals, and I'm one of those, went through the program management licensee training and also the 2-week Jonah program. By the way, this education was a part of our implementation, so it had some impact on us being able to complete networks and get schedules started. We also have 3 senior personnel who are trained in ProChain Plus, Project 98, and VISIO for the information system, for status and reporting, and we use VISIO for network creation and analysis. As I said earlier, we are in between the launch phase of phase 5 and phase 6. Our task updating and metrics are in effect. The project status and analysis is in effect. Resource allocation and controls for task switching are not yet fully compliant. We still have some of the old, we still have multitasking going on. Action planning and management are not yet fully implemented, fully compliant, but we are in that compliant stage. Buffer management, we are, and that's why we have moved more towards phase 6, the institutionalization part of it. We are definitely identifying areas for improvement, specifically in our engineering area. It becomes very apparent once you get all these networks visible where the problems with the schedule are. We are fine-tuning networks and times based on the new culture, and we'll continue to do that as we capture more information. We're taking on more project work. Very shortly, we will be looking at 5 new projects by year end, and 4 proposals by year end. So we are in that phase where, as it's been described to me, taking on new work. And we are monitoring and elevating the drum, and I would be discussing about a phenomena that we observed and analyzed and helped us to discern some decisions, some really tough decisions we had to make concerning a couple projects. What was phase 1? It was buy-in of management. Our initial contact came through the company comptroller, and as a matter of fact, he has since moved on to greater things, but he's here today. And he ought to be kind of proud that we're still working this problem that he's identified. We reviewed several alternatives between January and May of '98, and we interviewed an AGI associate, and then later we discussed what we really needed was a little more experience, and we asked Dee to help us out. Phase 1 then started in June, and when I say phase 1, that also included our education. We were definitely just green, senior people with no understanding of what TOC was. There was a 4-day off-site with senior management and the AGI partner, as well as myself. 4 days, Dee, you had to be real flexible in that regard, because there was an awful lot that had to be covered and get done, and yet Dee was willing to take on a 4-day period. Actually, it was over 5 days, but we only had 4 days covered with the executives. And the lesson learned for me there was the internal champion has to be highly motivated. And when I say internal champion, I'm the team leader. And this was a new set of doors for me to walk through. So I had to be motivated. What does it mean? I had to think creatively. How do you get 4 executives, or was there 4 or 5? I guess there were 6 executives together all at once. Wasn't sure quite how to do that. Called up the secretary, for John's secretary, and said, please clear their schedules. And I thought I was going to get a battle, and it didn't happen. I was able to get them to clear their schedules. So we got them in a room. Had to be assertive. Where there are no apparent rules, you got to be bold. And there are a lot of not apparent rules, I found out. And when solutions aren't apparent, ask someone. Sometimes I'd ask Dee, sometimes I would ask my supervisor, sometimes I would even talk to a secretary about a potential solution for something. So what did we do during phase 1 in this offsite? Day 1 was spent talking about our problems and our current reality. What were we doing on projects? And Dee also, this was the accelerated course, Dee also showed us what the generic solution was going to be. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of thoughts on it. In fact, there were some contingencies that had to be put in there to ensure that our executives were comfortable. But then days 3 through 5 were customization of the solution and an implementation plan. And out of that, we had a network for Reflectone's implementation, as well as a deliverable, a summary of the agreements and the discussions that had gone on. Phase 2 is the launching of the new direction. We didn't do real well at that. This was a new door for us to walk through. We had the meeting in the high bay, but there were some things that I think we could have done better. It was one launch meeting. Now, in retrospect, we might want to do it in two parts. Some kind of mini launch meeting of the Phase 3 participants, in other words, the resource managers and the project teams that are going to be involved, and what they're going to be involved in. In a high bay setting, it's as big as this room, and there are about 500 people in the room out in the high bay. I don't think we got across to them how significant the change was going to be and what was going to be necessary. There needs to be clear communication, what needs to happen, the order of the implementation, and the roles of specific personnel. So we have learned that lesson. I share that with you. That launch meeting is an important meeting for establishing some initial buy-in. And if you do it in two parts, where the audience is a little smaller, I think you'll get a much clearer definition of what's going to have to happen. Phase 3 was the initial scheduling and individual project launches. This happened from September through, from July through September. There were a couple of things that went on. But in that time frame, we were building our internal expertise, and that came from broad product knowledge, and that was extremely desirable. I'm the director of program scheduling. We utilize the director of proposal development and 2 program management directors for commercial trainers and maintenance trainers. These were individuals who have been in the industry for, I would say, a total of 100 years of experience in this kind of industry. So we knew the product very well, we know the business very well, and we know Reflectone very well. That could be a hindrance. You know, you have some baggage you carry with you. You know, listening to the Synergist guys, maybe some younger guys would have been able to pull it off quicker, but we have a very complex product. Lessons learned: assignment must be treated as critical for the company, but it's also something that these individuals need to know that this is career enhancing. This isn't something that you're going to do and then it's going to go away. It's something that we need you for. You may, at the end of the implementation, go do something a little bit different, but we're going to need your expertise as time goes by. We were also building our information system expertise at that time. There we chose a few individuals from outside the company who had broad business knowledge. One individual who has about 25 or 30 years of operations analysis works as our manager of integrated scheduling. We have a systems analyst who actually started out life as an electrical engineer, moved into manufacturing engineering, and has a lot of database experience and MRP interfacing experience. That's valuable for the additional automation that we wanted to get. And then we also have a master scheduler who helps us with critical change schedules and MRP alignment. Lessons learned. And this one was the one that I can't say enough about because we really did feel that we had this support, and that is hiring of personnel, purchasing of software tools, training and equipment is critical. And we had all the support we needed to get that accomplished. Our initial buy-in with the project teams, and this was one where we did it en masse, 2 days off-site session, booked 2. There were initially 4 networks, and I think that ended up being 5. Initially, there were fewer tasks in these networks relative to later projects, and expectations required a lot of management. We had daily implementation team meetings, essentially, and they were very essential to maintaining continuity, sharing knowledge, and determining priorities. And let me talk about networks and tasks. We are in a raging debate about how many network tasks are they, and I heard it here today, too. Our networks are pretty sophisticated. In fact, they have a lot of tasks in them. And we are in that process where we're trying to determine what is the method we need to use to define a good network. So we have a cloud that we're examining, and the cloud is is this one. If you're going to have a good network, the top side of it is you need to be able to see and manage big picture easily. Now, who would want to see that? Program managers would like to be able to see that and report it. In order to be able to see the big picture, you need as little detail as necessary in the network. But the conflict with that is, in order to have a good network, we have to believe we can plan with our type of environment, and we have to have detail needed for scheduling resources, and we have to have detail to understand resource and task dependencies. In order to do that, we need a lot of detail. So there's the conflict that we're in. I don't have all the solutions yet, but we are working with some of the injections already. Use software filters to see key pieces. That's very easy for us to do, and we have it. And you'll see some of that in a couple more slides. And use reports to see only applicable data for the next window of time. What we haven't successfully, or we haven't really examined in detail yet, is the other injections on the bottom of the slide. Can we template subnetworks for scheduling certain subgroups of tasks, as well as use those templates to figure out what the loading is? So I've got a task from my boss, as a matter of fact, on how do we simplify these things? How do we make them so that a broad range of requirements are met for information? Some of the things that we identified: critical chain gaps initially were viewed as bad. One of the things that we found with the tools is that we could model some things that phenomenons that we were seeing. Here's a typical example of a network, a very simple network that we wanted to use for understanding gap analysis. This thing has a critical chain, but it also has a task off the critical chain that's constrained, both to a critical chain task on both ends. We put this very simple model into ProChain with Microsoft Project. The first graph here is associated with leveling the load. The second graph is associated with identifying the critical chain. And then compute the buffers and insert the buffers. And our networks, as they started out, and almost every network that we use starts out with gaps in the critical chain. So how do you examine them? Well, we first of all needed to understand the phenomenon. And then we needed to understand how to look at the buffer, or the tasks associated with that particular buffer, in order to challenge the assumptions. So we do that. So that was one thing that came up very quickly. We also found out that gaps aren't necessarily bad if they're a small period of time. But when they're months and quarters, then there's something that you need to do to the network. Another thing that we do is that we use VISIO for constructing networks. And it is a visual form for understanding network model, and actually is a form of a database. We were able to develop generic templates for the repetitive processes, and we've had some discussion about that with I believe it was the Synergist guys. And we've done some of that in ours, and we also were able to document these very rapidly. These task entities and arrows are transferred directly to Microsoft Project. We've built some analysis tools, and we've built some macros that will allow us to get that to Project. This is an example of a network from VISIO. This is what an entity looks like for us. It has several fields in here. We also built this little Visual Basic front end, which allows us to prepare the networks for transferring, because sometimes you'll have arrows going in the wrong direction, sometimes you have disconnects, sometimes you'll have tasks without successors to them. So we're able to analyze the networks. We found that ProChain Plus in Project 98 is a good solution, especially in view of our recent implementation of MRP2 system and our lack of understanding of detailed planning and scheduling. I've been with Reflectone for 15 years. There are others of us in the team who have been there longer. We've never done detailed planning, detailed scheduling. So this was all brand new for us. VISIO and 98 are a robust set of tools with Microsoft, the Microsoft Office suite, Internet, and Outlook. And we utilize all the capabilities of that. And our reports and analysis and presentation formats have been exploited and automated to the extent that most of our status and reporting now is paperless. Along the way, standards and processes were documented during our implementation. We keep a notebook of these standards and processes. They're key to maintaining quality and cycle time for critical change schedules in order for us to reduce that cycle time. As processes and standards are refined, the implementation team experienced a growth in expertise. We were able to explain things, how well something was modeled and why it was modeled the way it was. Lessons learned. Network input can be extremely transaction intensive. And by that I mean if you don't have networks, you got a lot of keying entry to do. And if we were to do this over again, I would want somebody who's got a lot of experience and can come in with some tools, and you would reduce that analysis time very quickly. We had to do a lot of the tool building and analysis while we were building networks. But we had really minimal coding. We have 13,000 lines of macro code in 5 applications. That's really not a lot because a lot of it is very repetitive. In Project is where we did most of our coding. We have also macro code in VISIO, Access, Excel, and Word. We produce 4 types of graphics twice weekly. Our status reporting is done twice weekly at this stage. We could report it every day now if we wanted to. But we're in that phase right now where it's twice weekly is adequate. These produce graphics that are company-wide, program-specific, and also some resource-specific graphs. There are 5 structures that we really use that are involved in data analysis and data conversion. We start out with VISIO on networks. It provides a graphical model. It is a database, and it also provides us with an analysis tool to start out with. We transfer the network after it's been massaged by the macros directly to Project, but we also have some capability to transfer it to Excel to have the resource managers do some work for us offline. Once that's been transferred, then we apply ProChain, and we have a drum on Microsoft Project, a drum schedule. And from that master drum schedule and the master program schedule, we then build a master database in Access. And that's really the central repository for us for all of our reporting. We can provide hard copy reports as well as automatically transmit graphical information to our intranet. We're exploiting our intranet much more effectively than we had in any other time, any other period in our company's life. Some things that cause trigger for decisions: critical chain status over time, critical chain schedule status and buffer reporting, as well as activity reports. I'll show you an example of a critical chain status. You can do, once you get the data, just as Ellie has indicated, once you get the data, you can start mixing and matching it any way you want to, and you can start looking at it and presenting it however you'd like. This was just one way that we thought of to let people know that there's buffer penetration, both from a project point of view, from critical chain completion point of view, as well as feeding buffers. This is a graph that we're probably going to be doing more of. We pick out key tasks. This graph actually has key dates on it, and we have also our commitment dates. The red line shows the commitment dates for the contract. The green line shows the unbuffered dates for specific tasks. And the blue line is for the fully buffered dates. The black line is a living line. As the schedule ages and we update tasks, we see this line moving around. The critical chain status report and the buffer reports are basically the same reports that ProChain has. We added a few columns, but those status reports are the same ones. Those now are available online. We do not do any hard copying anymore. And we also have generated an activity report, which basically says from the last time we had a report update to this report update, what were the tasks that changed? Have you recovered any buffer? So it's a management tool for helping the program manager determine what's been active on his program and what kind of recovery has he had, or penetration. As I said, our projects are complex. There's generally about 9,000 to 12,000 parts in our project. The lengths of our projects are anywhere from 16 to 18 months, sometimes longer than that. Sometimes they go 2 years. At this stage, our networks are pretty complex. So we needed to understand the interactions, and in order to understand those interactions, we needed an ability to analyze. So we have done that. Some things that were going on that we had experienced. Basic assumptions in networks were challenged over and over and over again. We also had significantly late drum tasks causing additional buffer penetration on other projects. This is a phenomenon we had thought about for a couple months, but we never experienced it. Once we thought we were experiencing it, we developed a couple of models to let us look at it. And it helped us make a decision on a project recently on whether to take it off the drum or not. Simple 2 project with the drum schedule, project 1, project 2, just showing the drum schedule before tasks run late. Here's project 1 for the whole project. Project 2 is a little more complex. Critical chain has no gaps in it. Then what we did is we let the drum task run late. Actually, we let the whole project run late, but we let it run late such that the last drum task on project 1 exceeded its capacity buffer. And you can see it right here in that it is pushing into these tasks. Here's what the project 1 looks like after we just let all of the tasks run late. And here's what happens to the other project. And this is exactly the phenomenon that we experienced. Notice the drum or the critical chain schedule on project 2 is not affected, and any tasks that are not dependent or are not succeeded by a drum task are not affected. This was penetrating buffers. This also was something that we recognized as we added a new project to the drum. In a single project mode, everything looked fine. We were within all of the commitment dates. We put it on the drum and it popped out 3 months. We had a severe drum task decision because they were so late on a project. Now, why did it happen on our particular effort? We are a multinational company. We provide products around the world. We also have a division that is in another country. It's in the UK. We transferred that information, but we had not fully integrated that company with TOC because we were working at it on just this division. So when it went away, the communication went away as soon as the product went out the door. So we weren't getting task status back, but we had to make a decision.